The fog that morning was not merely a weather condition. It was a physical weight, a suffocating blanket that pressed the gray sky into the gray water until the horizon line was erased completely. The Strait of Juan de Fuca, usually a corridor of wind and whitecaps, had been reduced to a claustrophobic room with no walls. The air was unnaturally cold, damp, and smelled of low tide, that rich, sulphurous scent of decaying kelp, ancient salt, and the raw metallic tang of deep water. Elias Thorne sat in the stern of his 30-foot crab boat, the North Star, clutching a mug of coffee that had gone lukewarm 20 minutes ago. His hands, calloused and mapped with the scars of 4 decades at sea, were trembling slightly, though not from the cold. The engine was off. The ocean was dead calm. It was the kind of silence that usually precedes a violent storm, a barometric hush where the world holds its breath. But the glass on the bridge was steady. The silence felt wrong. It felt expectant. It felt like the quiet of a courtroom before the verdict is read. Elias had fished these waters since he was a boy of 12. He knew the rhythm of the swell, the specific chatter of the gulls, the breathing patterns of the sea lions. But today, the gulls were gone. The sky was empty of wings. The seals that usually barked from the jagged rocks of Tosh Island were missing, as if wiped from the earth. The water was a sheet of black glass, unblemished by wind or wake, reflecting nothing but the void above. Then he felt it. It wasn't a sound at first. It was a vibration in the hull. It traveled up through the fiberglass, through the soles of his rubber boots, and settled deep in the marrow of his bones. It was a low-frequency thrum, powerful, rhythmic, and terrifyingly deliberate. It felt less like a mechanical engine and more like a heartbeat the size of a building. Elias stood up, his knees popping, and scanned the impenetrable fog. He reached for the throttle, instinct screaming at him to run, to flee back to the safety of Knee Bay, but his hand froze in midair. The fog ahead of the bow began to glow. It wasn't a light source. It was the white, spectral spray of 100 exhalations happening at once. The mist parted as if sliced by a blade. They emerged like ghosts. First one dorsal fin, tall and black, cutting the surface with razor precision. Then another. Then 10. Then 50. They were moving in a line, shoulder to shoulder, a wall of black muscle spanning the width of the channel. Elias stopped breathing. He grabbed the gunwale to steady himself. He saw the curved, nicked fins of the resident pods, the salmon-eaters who usually stuck to the inner islands. But right next to them, moving in perfect, impossible synchronization, were the sharp, jagged dorsal fins of the transients, the mammal-eaters, the wolves of the sea. These were 2 tribes that had been at cultural and biological war for 10,000 years. They did not mix. They did not speak the same language. They avoided each other with a religiously adhered to distance. But here they were, a unified legion, a grand coalition of the apex predators, moving toward the open Pacific with a single, terrifying purpose. They passed the North Star without breaking formation. They didn't play in the wake. They didn't spy hop to look at the human on the boat. They ignored the vessel entirely, their massive bodies sliding through the water with the silence of oil. And as the last whale passed, a massive bull with a collapsed fin, Elias looked down at his fish finder. The screen wasn't showing depth. It wasn't showing fish. It was displaying a single static geometric pattern, a perfect circle with a vertical line bisecting it, burned into the pixels by a sonar pulse so focused and so intense it had rewritten the machine's software code. If you want to uncover the dark mysteries that lie beneath the surface and the true stories that science is terrified to touch, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications. We are diving into the unknown, and you won't want to miss what comes next. The anomaly began at exactly 6 o'clock hours, coinciding with the slack tide. By 8 o'clock, the report had hit the cluttered, coffee-stained desk of Dr. Elena Karas at the Center for Cetacean Research on San Juan Island. Elena was not your typical academic. She didn't wear a pristine white lab coat or sit in a sterile university office. She wore oversized wool sweaters that smelled of wet dog and neoprene. And she lived in a converted boathouse filled with humming servers, tangled hydrophone cables, and half-empty cups of herbal tea. She was brilliant, abrasive, and currently very, very confused. She was staring at a spectrogram on her main monitor, a visual representation of sound frequencies recorded by the underwater array in Harrow Strait, and trying to make sense of the impossible. Usually, an Orca recording looks like a chaotic scatter of scratches and squiggles. Clicks for echolocation look like vertical lines. Whistles for communication look like sweeping curves. It is a messy, organic language. But this looked like architecture. This looked like a blueprint. It's not a glitch, Elena muttered, rubbing eyes that were red from lack of sleep. It's a syntax. It's a structured data packet. The image on the screen showed a series of low-frequency pulses, spaced with mathematical precision. Thump, pause. Thump, thump, pause. Thump. It repeated every 14 seconds, down to the millisecond. The frequency was 15 hertz below the range of human hearing, but felt as a pressure wave in the chest. It was loud, incredibly loud. The decibel reading was off the charts, loud enough to stun fish, loud enough to vibrate the rivets of a ship, loud enough to be heard for hundreds of miles underwater. Her assistant, a grad student named Ben, who looked like he hadn't slept in a week and was vibrating with caffeine, was pacing frantically behind her. Dr. Karras, the hydrophone network is lighting up. It's not just J-Pod. It's everyone. We have reports from Vancouver Island, from Puget Sound, even from the offshore trawlers near the continental shelf. Every orca in the Salish Sea is heading west, and they're all making this sound. Only this sound. They've dropped their family dialects. Are they feeding? Elena asked, her fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to isolate the signal from the background noise of shipping traffic. No, they're ignoring the salmon runs, which are peaking right now. They're ignoring the harbor seals. They're just marching. It's a forced march. Elena pulled up the live feed from the Limekill lighthouse. The camera showed the channel. The water was churning. It looked like a boiling river of black and white. Hundreds of whales. The sheer biomass was staggering. The energy required to coordinate this movement, to suppress the natural aggression between the pods, was immense. This isn't migration, Elena said, her voice dropping to a whisper that barely registered over the hum of the hard drives. This is mobilization. This is an army. She keyed in a command to filter the audio, stripping away the engine noise of a passing freighter. She wanted to hear it. She put on her heavy, noise-canceling headphones and turned the volume dial up slowly, bracing herself. The sound that filled her ears was terrifying. It didn't sound like an animal. It didn't have the organic, wavering quality of a biological call. It sounded mechanical. It sounded like a massive, rusted gate swinging shut in the deep, grinding against the bedrock. It was a drone, heavy and final. And underneath the drone, buried in the subbase, was a rapid-fire clicking. Elena froze. She knew that clicking. It was echolocation, but it wasn't being used to find prey. The interval was too fast, the pulses too compressed. It was data transmission. They were sending information to each other, or to something else, at a bandwidth that shouldn't be possible for a biological brain to process. It was like listening to a modem connect to the internet, but the modem was made of flesh and blood. "Ben," she said, taking the headphones off and staring at the wall. "Call the Navy." Ben stopped pacing. He looked at her as if she had grown a second head. "The Navy? You hate the Navy. You spent 3 years suing them over sonar testing. You called them acoustic terrorists in the Times. Call them," she commanded, her voice steel. "Because whatever this is, it's going to show up on their threat boards as a weapon. It looks like a jamming signal. And I don't want them to start shooting before we know what we're dealing with." 30 miles away, on the bridge of the USS Mural, an Arleigh Burke-class destroyer conducting routine training exercises off the coast of Washington. The mood was shifting rapidly from boredom to controlled panic. Commander James Vance stood over the sonar station, his hands clasped behind his back, watching the color drain from his operator's face. The bridge was quiet, save for the hum of electronics and the low murmur of the crew, but the tension was thick enough to choke on. "Report," Vance barked, his eyes fixed on the display. "Sir, I don't know what I have," the sonar tech, a young petty officer named Lewis, stammered. "I have multiple contacts, hundreds, bearing 090, range 4,000 yards and closing. They're moving at 20 knots. That's attack speed. Submarines?" Vance asked, his mind already running through the threat matrix. "Russian? Chinese drones?" "No, sir. Biologicals. Whales. But the acoustic signature." "Sir, they're jamming us." Vance frowned, leaning in closer. "Whales don't jam sonar, son. They run from it. Active sonar hurts them. Not today. Look at the waterfall display." Vance leaned in. The screen, usually a cascade of green lines showing the ocean floor and biological noise, was a solid wall of white static. It looked like snow. The ship's active sonar, a sophisticated system designed to detect enemy submarines miles away, was being washed out completely. The whales were emitting a frequency that perfectly matched the ship's outgoing ping, but inverted. It was noise cancellation. Active, intentional, calculated noise cancellation. "That's impossible," Vance whispered, the hairs on his neck standing up. "They can't know the frequency. That's classified. That cycle changes every millisecond." "They're adapting, sir," Lewis said, his voice rising in pitch. "I switched to 30 kilohertz. They switched to 30 kilohertz. I dropped to 10. They dropped to 10. They are matching us beat for beat. They are blinding us." "Helm!" Vance shouted, standing up straight. "All stop. General quarters. Get me a visual. I want to see what is out there." The destroyer shuddered as the massive engines reversed and then idled. The klaxon alarm began to blare, the rhythmic whoop-whoop sending the crew scrambling to their battle stations. Vance walked to the wing of the bridge, the wind whipping his uniform, and raised his binoculars. The fog was lifting slightly, revealing the gray expanse of the sea. The ocean around the warship was erupting. They weren't attacking the hull. They were circling it. A perimeter of killer whales, 3 deep, swimming in a tight, counterclockwise vortex around the steel giant. The wake from their movement was creating a localized current, a whirlpool that was actually rocking the 9,000-ton vessel. Vance watched, mesmerized and horrified, as a massive male, a bull with a dorsal fin 6 feet high and nicked with the white scars of a century of battles, broke formation. The whale swam directly toward the ship's bow. He didn't dive. He surfaced, rolled on his side, and lifted his massive blunt head out of the water. The spy hop, the whale's eye, a dark patch on the black skin, locked onto the bridge. It wasn't the blank stare of a fish. It was the scrutiny of an intelligence. Vance felt a chill that had nothing to do with the wind. He had stared down Russian captains, Somali pirates, and hurricanes. He had never felt judged until now. "Sir," the tactical officer called out from the doorway, breaking the spell. "We have a call coming in on the distress frequency. It's a civilian. A Dr. Karras. She says she knows what they're doing. She says it's urgent. Put her through to the bridge speaker," Vance ordered, not taking his eyes off the whale. The speakers crackled to life, static hissing before a voice cut through. "Commander, this is Dr. Elena Karras. Listen to me very carefully. Do not go active sonar. Do not engage your engines. You are in the middle of a delicate conversation, and you are the intruder." "Conversation?" Vance snapped, his patience fraying. "Dr. Karras, these animals are jamming a United States warship. They are executing a coordinated blockade. That is a hostile act. It's not hostile. It's a quarantine. Elena's voice was tinny but sharp, filled with a frantic authority. They aren't trying to hurt you. They're trying to stop you from going further west. Why? Vance asked. What is out there? Because they're scared, Elena said. I've analyzed the signal. It's not aggression. It's an alarm. A planetary alarm. Something is happening out on the Juan de Fuca plate, Commander. Something big. And they are trying to keep us away from the epicenter. Vance looked down at the whale. The bull slapped his tail against the water crack, a sound like a gunshot that echoed off the steel hull. My seismic sensors are flat, Doctor, Vance said, checking the readout. There is no earthquake. The plate is stable. Not yet, Elena replied. But they hear it. They hear the rock screaming before it breaks. They hear the pressure building in the hydrate fields. Commander, look at your depth sounder. Tell me what you see. Vance nodded to the sonar tech. Lewis, give me a reading on the bottom. Sir, the tech said, his voice trembling. The bottom is moving. Vance looked at the screen. The readout for the sea floor, usually a steady line at 600 feet, was fluctuating wildly. Rising, falling, like the earth itself was breathing heavily. What is that? Vance asked. Is it a sub? A landslide? Gas, the tech said, realization dawning with horror. Massive methane release. The crust is fracturing. The hydrates are melting. Suddenly, the circle of whales broke. In unison, as if controlled by a single mind, they turned away from the ship and swam hard to the east, back toward the safety of the islands. They were fleeing. They were running for their lives. They warned us, Elena said over the speaker, her voice quiet now, resigned. They held the line to warn us, and now they're running. Helm, Vance screamed, the danger finally clicking into place. Flank speed, hard to port. Get us out of here. Now, but it was too late. The physics of the ocean were changing beneath them. The water around the mural turned white. It wasn't whales this time. It was bubbles. Millions of cubic feet of methane gas, released from the frozen hydrates deep below the crust, were rushing to the surface. When water becomes aerated, it loses its density. It becomes a froth that can no longer support the weight of a ship. The bow of the destroyer dipped violently. The propellers spun wildly in the froth, biting nothing but foam, the engines over-revving with a scream of metal. The ship groaned, the steel hull twisting as the buoyancy vanished from under the keel. It was like falling down an elevator shaft. Doctor, Vance said, gripping the console as the deck tilted 20 degrees, alarm screaming around him. We are losing buoyancy. We are sinking. Get your men off, Elena said, her voice breaking. Get them into the water. Get away from the ship. The whales might help. The line went dead as the power failed. Back in the lab, Elena watched the telemetry from the destroyer disappear from her screen. The green dot that represented 300 lives winked out. Oh my God, Ben whispered, his hands covering his mouth. Did they just sink a destroyer? No, Elena said, staring at the spectrogram, tears welling in her eyes. The pattern on the screen had changed. The rhythmic thumping was gone. It was replaced by a long, high-pitched whistle. A morning song. A eulogy. The Earth did. The whales just tried to stop it. She stood up, knocking her chair over. Pack the mobile gear, Ben. Everything. We're going to the coast. Why? Ben asked. What can we do? This isn't just a gas vent, Elena said, grabbing hard drives and stuffing them into a waterproof case. That was the precursor. That was the pressure release valve blowing off. Precursor to what? Elena pointed to the screen. The signal from the whales was evolving. It was getting more complex. It wasn't just a warning anymore. It was a countdown. The pattern repeats every 14 minutes, Elena said. But the interval is shortening. 13 minutes. 12. When it hits zero, whatever they are running from is going to hit the coast. How long do we have? 6 hours, Elena said. Maybe 7. We need to get to high ground. And we need to record every second of this. Because the ocean is speaking, Ben. And for the first time in human history, we have the Rosetta Stone. They ran to the truck, the gravel crunching under their boots. Outside, the sky had turned a strange, bruised purple. The birds were silent. The air was heavy with static electricity, making the hair on their arms stand up. And far out in the strait, the surface of the ocean was beginning to boil, a cauldron of escaping gas and terrified life. The drive to the observation point at Limekill was a blur of winding roads and frantic phone calls. Elena tried to reach the emergency services, but the lines were jammed. It seemed the event wasn't local. Reports were coming in from social media. Whales beaching themselves in Oregon. Dolphins swarming harbors in California. The entire biological network of the Pacific was in a state of panic. They reached the lighthouse just as the sun began to dip below the horizon. The view from the cliff was apocalyptic. The fog had cleared, revealing a sea that looked wrong. The color was off a milky turquoise green, caused by the sediment and gas rising from the deep. And there, in the middle of the strait, was the debris field of the mural. The ship was gone, swallowed by the aeration zone. But circling the debris field were the Orcas. They had come back. Why did they come back? Ben asked, setting up the parabolic microphone with shaking hands. If the gas is still rising, it's suicide. They're looking for survivors, Elena said, adjusting the focus on her spotting scope. Look. Through the lens, she saw it. Orange life rafts bobbing in the chop. And around the rafts, the black fins were patrolling. They weren't attacking. They were pushing. They were nudging the rafts away from the bubbling aeration zone, pushing them toward the cleaner water, toward the shore. They're saving them, Elena whispered. After we ignored them, after we polluted them, after we hunted them, they're saving us. But then the sound changed again. The hydrophone picked up a new noise. It wasn't the whales. It was a grinding sound, deep, resonant, like two tectonic plates gnashing their teeth together. The ground beneath the lighthouse lurched violently. Elena grabbed the railing to keep from falling. A seismic wave rolled through the bedrock, cracking the pavement of the parking lot. It's starting, she said, but the whales didn't scatter. They stopped pushing the rafts. They turned, all of them, hundreds of them. They turned to face the open ocean. They formed a line, a phalanx, facing the incoming energy. And then they screamed. It wasn't a call. It wasn't a song. It was a weaponized pulse of sound, focused outward into the deep. What are they doing? Ben yelled over the rumbling of the earth. They're not running, Elena realized, her mind racing to catch up with the biology. They're counteracting. They're using constructive interference. They're trying to dampen the wave. That's impossible, Ben said. They're just animals. No, Elena said, watching the water vibrate around the whales. They're the immune system, and we're about to see how strong they really are. The physics of a tsunami are terrifyingly simple. It is energy traveling through water. A displacement of the ocean floor, an earthquake, a landslide, a gas release, pushes a column of water upward, and gravity pulls it back down. This oscillation creates a wave that moves at the speed of a jetliner in deep water, slowing and growing in height as it hits the shallows. The wave approaching the San Juan Islands wasn't a towering Hollywood wall of water. It was a surge, a relentless rising tide that promised to erase the coastline. But the physics of what was happening in the strait defied every model Elena knew. The line of Orcas resident, transient, offshore held their formation. They were spaced evenly, roughly 50 feet apart, creating a perforated barrier that stretched for miles. As the water began to rush back in, filling the void left by the receding tide, the whales did not dive. They began to tailslap. It wasn't random. It was a synchronized percussion. Slap, slap, thousands of tons of muscle hitting the water at the exact same millisecond. "Look at the wave front," Elena yelled, pointing at the monitor connected to the cliffside radar. The incoming surge was hitting the acoustic wall created by the whales. The energy of their tails, combined with the intense, focused cavitation of their vocalizations, was creating a turbulence field. It was disrupting the laminar flow of the tsunami. The wave wasn't stopping. Nothing stops a tsunami, but it was breaking. The energy was being scattered, turned from a coherent wall of destruction into a chaotic, frothing chop. "They're fragmenting it," Ben shouted, his eyes wide. "They're turning a sledgehammer into a handful of gravel." The water hit the whales first. They were tossed like driftwood. Elena watched in horror as massive bulls were flipped end over end, as mothers were separated from calves in the washing machine of white water. But they didn't break the line. As soon as they resurfaced, they reoriented. They kept screaming into the oncoming current. The surge hit the shore of San Juan Island with a roar that shook the lighthouse foundation. It washed over the rocks, flooding the lower roads, smashing debris against the cliffs. But it didn't crest the high water mark. It didn't sweep away the town. It was a flood, not an annihilation. The whales had bought them 10 feet of mercy. As the water receded, dragging mud and trees back into the strait, the silence returned. But it was a different kind of silence. It was the silence of exhaustion. Elena scanned the water with her binoculars. The strait was a mess of foam and wreckage from the mural, and floating in the debris were the bodies. Not humans, whales. "We have casualties," Elena said, her voice shaking. "We have heavy casualties." She saw a young female drifting motionless, her white belly exposed to the sky. She saw a calf nudging a mother who wouldn't wake up. The acoustic effort, the physical trauma of the wave, it had cost them. But the survivors were already moving. They weren't licking their wounds. They were regrouping around the life rafts from the destroyer. "We have to go down there," Elena said. "We have to help them." They scrambled down the cliff path to the marina. The water level was high, lapping at the floorboards of the dock, but Elena's Zodiac was still tied up. They loaded the gear and motored out into the devastation. The scene in the water was surreal. A fog had rolled back in, thin and wispy. The smell of methane was gone, replaced by the copper scent of blood and diesel fuel. As they approached the cluster of life rafts, a Navy sailor waved a flare. "Over here." "We have injured." Elena steered the Zodiac alongside the lead raft. Commander Vance was there, soaked, shivering, a gash on his forehead. He looked at Elena, then he looked at the water. Surrounding the rafts were 4 large male orcas. They were logging resting at the surface, but their eyes were open, watching the humans. They had formed a living corral, keeping the rafts together, preventing them from drifting into the dangerous currents of the outer strait. "They saved us," Vance rasped. "I saw it. The wave came, and they took the hit. They put themselves between us and the water." "I know," Elena said, cutting the engine. "Commander, we need to get your men to shore." "But I need to stay here." "Why?" "Because the signal hasn't stopped," Elena said, glancing at her portable hydrophone. "They're still broadcasting." "And the pattern has changed again." Vance listened. Through the hull of the raft, he could feel it, a low, rhythmic pulsing. It wasn't the alarm anymore. It sounded like a beacon. "Who are they calling?" Vance asked. "I don't think they're calling anyone," Elena said, looking out at the foggy horizon. "I think they're answering." Suddenly, the water erupted 50 yards away. A massive shape breached, but it wasn't an orca. It was gray. It was scarred. It was a humpback whale, then another, then a gray whale, then a minke. Elena stood up in the boat, nearly tipping it. "Ben, are you seeing this?" "Baleen whales," Ben stammered. "Humpbacks, grays, they don't mix with orcas. Orcas eat their babies." Not today, Elena said. The great whales were arriving in droves. They were responding to the beacon. The Orcas, the wolves of the sea, had called for reinforcements, and the giants had answered. The humpbacks moved in, their massive pectoral fins creating calm eddies in the water. They positioned themselves around the injured Orcas, supporting them, lifting them to the surface to breathe. It was an interspecies triage. It was a display of altruism that defied every biological imperative of predator and prey. This isn't just a rescue, Elena realized. This is a council. She dropped the hydrophone into the water. The audio that came through was a cacophony of clicks, whistles, groans, and songs. But as she listened, her computer began to parse the data. The AI software, designed to find patterns in chaos, flagged a recurring sequence. It was a sequence of 3 pulses: low, high, low. Elena recognized it. She had seen it in the archives, in recordings from the 1970s, from the 90s, from deep-sea hydrophones in the Mariana Trench. It was a signal that had always been dismissed as geological noise. "It's a name," Elena whispered. "Whose name?" Ben asked. "The ocean's," Elena said. "They're naming the ocean, or they're naming the threat." Just then, a helicopter rotor thumped overhead. A Coast Guard Jayhawk appeared out of the mist, lowering a basket for the Navy survivors. The noise of the chopper was deafening. The whales reacted instantly. The Orcas slapped their tails. The humpbacks trumpet blowed. They were agitated. "They don't like the noise," Elena yelled to Vance. "Tell the pilot to back off." "They're still communicating." Vance grabbed the radio from his survival vest. "Coast Guard, this is Commander Vance. Back off. Maintain altitude. You are disrupting a biological event." "Commander, we are here to extract you," the pilot argued. "I said back off." "That is a direct order." The helicopter pulled up, hovering at a higher altitude. The noise faded, the whales settled. And then, the center of the formation opened up. The Orcas and humpbacks moved aside, creating a clear channel of water leading to the west. From the depths of that channel, something rose. It wasn't a whale. It wasn't a sub. It was an object. It was black, metallic, smooth, and roughly the size of a school bus. It broke the surface without a splash, hovering just inches above the waterline. It had no windows, no engines, no markings. It hummed with the same 15 hertz frequency the whales had been emitting. Elena dropped her binoculars. "What is that?" Vance stared at it. "That's not ours. That's not Chinese. That's not human." The object rotated slowly. It seemed to be scanning the circle of whales. The whales were silent now. They were waiting. The object emitted a pulse of blue light that swept over the water, scanning the whales, the debris, the raft, and finally, Elena's Zodiac. When the light hit Elena, she felt a sudden sharp headache, followed by a wave of clarity. Images flashed in her mind. Not thoughts, but pictures. A burning reef. A plastic-choked gyre. A silent, empty ocean. "They're showing us," Elena gasped, clutching her head. "They're showing us what we did." "Who?" Ben asked, terrified. "The aliens?" "No," Elena said, tears streaming down her face. "The whales. That thing, it's a probe. It's a monitor." The whales summoned it. They called the manager. The object hovered for another minute, processing the data. Then, it emitted a sound of pure, piercing tone that shattered the glass of the Zodiac's windshield. The whales responded with a unified call, a sound of acceptance, a sound of judgment rendered. The object shot straight up into the sky, accelerating from 0 to Mach 10 in a heartbeat, vanishing into the clouds without a sonic boom. The silence that followed was absolute. The whales began to disperse. The humpbacks dove. The Orcas turned back toward the islands. The alliance was over. The council was adjourned. Vance looked at Elena. "What just happened?" "I think," Elena said, wiping the blood from her cheek, or a shard of glass had nicked her. We just got put on probation. Probation? The whales, they aren't just animals, Commander. They're the caretakers. And they just reported us to the landlord. The Coast Guard helicopter moved back in to pick up the survivors. The Navy would classify the incident. They would call the object a weather balloon or a swamp gas anomaly. They would explain the whale behavior as a freak migration caused by the seismic event. But Elena had the recordings. She had the data. As they motored back to the harbor, the sun finally broke through the clouds. The water sparkled, innocent and blue. But Elena knew better. She looked down at the depth sounder. The bottom was still moving. The gas was gone, but the crust was shifting. Ben, she said quietly, upload the data to the cloud. Now, encrypt it. Send it to every university, every news outlet, every server you can access. They'll discredit us, Ben said. They'll say we're crazy. Let them, Elena said. Because the warning wasn't for the tsunami. The tsunami was just the wake-up call. What was the warning for? Elena looked back at the ocean. Far out, a single orca breached, holding its body vertical in the air for a long second, watching them go. The warning, Elena said, was for the eviction. The fallout from the Salish Sea event was global, messy, and predictably bureaucratic. The United States Navy seized the hard drives from Elena's lab within 6 hours of her return to the harbor. They arrived in unmarked SUVs, men in dark suits who moved with the efficiency of algorithms, stripping the servers and boxing up the hydrophone logs. They cited national security. They established a 2-mile maritime exclusion zone around Strait, enforced by armed patrol boats. They put Commander Vance on indefinite administrative leave, stripping him of his command and threatening him with court-martial if he spoke a single word to the press. The official narrative was tidy, sanitized, and completely false. A localized seismic event caused a pocket of trapped methane to release, which disoriented local marine life and caused a minor tidal surge. The unidentified object was dismissed as an optical illusion caused by gas refraction and atmospheric thermal layers. But you cannot scrub the internet. Ben had uploaded the data. The files, terabytes of acoustic recordings, grainy video of the Interspecies Council, and the terrifying spectrogram of the 15 Hz signal hit the dark web first, then leaked onto Reddit, and finally exploded across the major news outlets. The world listened. They heard the scream that dampened the wave. They heard the beacon call that summoned the sky. And they saw the footage of the black object rising from the sea like a dark monolith. Arguments raged in comment sections and cable news panels. Was it a hoax? Was it a secret military drone? Was it first contact? Dr. Elena Karras went underground. She knew her lab was compromised, and she knew the men in suits would be back for her mind, not just her hard drives. She took what mattered, her raw handwritten notes, a backup drive she had sewn into the lining of her parka, and her portable acoustic rig, and retreated to a family cabin on the wild, rain-battered coast of Vancouver Island. She wasn't hiding out of fear. She was hiding to work. Because the data contained something the Navy had missed, something the internet sleuths hadn't found yet. Buried in the sub-frequencies of the whale calls, underneath the alarm and the beacon, was a third signal. It was a complex layered code that repeated every hour on the hour. It wasn't directed at the sky. It wasn't directed at the other whales. It was directed at the land. It was a set of coordinates. 3 weeks after the event, Elena sat in the dim light of the cabin, the wood stove hissing as rain lashed against the cedar siding. She was staring at a bathymetric map of the Pacific Northwest. The coordinates pointed to a location 60 miles offshore, deep in the Cascadia subduction zone. It was a spot known to geologists as a locked zone, a place where the Juan de Fuca plate was wedged underneath the North American plate, building up pressure for centuries. It was the epicenter of the inevitable Big One, a magnitude 9.0 earthquake that would devastate the coast from California to Canada. They aren't just reporting us, Elena realized, tracing the fault line with a trembling finger. They're trying to fix it. There was a heavy knock on the door. Elena jumped, her heart hammering against her ribs. She grabbed the canister of bear spray from the table, the only weapon she had. "Dr. Karras?" A voice called out. It was deep, rough, and familiar. She opened the door a crack, keeping the chain engaged. Commander James Vance stood there on the porch, dripping wet. He was wearing civilian clothes, a flannel shirt and jeans that looked stiff and new. He looked older than he had on the life raft. The lines around his eyes were etched deep with sleeplessness. "How did you find me?" Elena asked, not unhooking the chain. "I have friends in naval intelligence who still owe me favors," Vance said, wiping rain from his face. "And I have a boat. Can I come in?" "It's a long drive back to civilization." Elena studied him. He didn't look like a threat. He looked like a man whose world had shattered. She undid the chain and let him in. Vance stepped into the warmth, looking around the cabin, noting the maps pinned to the walls and the computer servers humming in the corner. "You've been busy," he said, nodding at the screens. "I'm decoding the signal," Elena said, moving to the stove to pour in coffee. "Why are you here, James?" "If they catch you with me, you'll go to Leavenworth." "I can't sleep," Vance said, sitting down heavily on the worn sofa. "Every time I close my eyes, I see that thing rising out of the water, and I hear them. They saved my life, Elena. They saved my crew. And my government is treating them like an insurgency. They're dropping depth charges in the Strait to deter them from coming back. They're calling it acoustic sanitization." Elena dropped the mug. It shattered on the floor, coffee splashing onto her boots. "They're what? Depth charges? That will kill them. The concussive force alone will liquefy their internal organs." "I know. That's why I'm here. I have a contact at the submarine base in Bangor. There's a sub going out tonight. The USS Nevada. It's an Ohio-class ballistic missile submarine, but they've retrofitted it for this mission. Their orders are to pulse the fault line with high-intensity active sonar to scatter the pods before they can congregate again." "That's insanity," Elena said, her voice rising to a shout. "If they pulse the fault line right now, with the pressure already critical, they could trigger the earthquake. They'll cause the very disaster the whales were trying to prevent." "Exactly," Vance said. "We have to stop them." "How? You're a civilian now." "I'm a fugitive. We can't exactly call the Pentagon. We go to the coordinates," Vance said, pulling a folded chart from his jacket. "The spot the whales are broadcasting. If we're right, if they're doing something out there, we need to document it. And we need to get in the way of that sub." "With what? Your fishing boat?" "No," Vance smiled grimly. "With the North Star. I tracked down Elias, the crabber who saw the first wave. He's docked in Tofino. He's willing to take us. He says the whales told him to. They left at midnight." The North Star chugged out of the harbor under the cover of a moonless sky, moving silently past the sleeping fishing fleet. The ocean was rough tonight, a choppy, confused sea that battered the old crab boat, sending sheets of spray over the wheelhouse. Elias stood at the wheel, chewing on a toothpick, his eyes scanning the dark water with the intensity of a radar dish. "They're out there," Elias said, his voice barely audible over the diesel engine. "I can feel them. The water feels thick." He was right. As soon as they crossed the continental shelf drop-off, where the ocean floor plunges into the abyss, the sonar screen lit up. But this time, it wasn't a static image. It was movement. Thousands of targets. "It's the gathering," Elena whispered, looking at the screen. "They're all here. Residents, transients, offshores, even the deep water species." They reached the coordinates at 3:00 hours. The scene was unlike anything Elena had ever imagined, a tableau that defied all biological logic. The water was glowing. Bioluminescence, stirred up by the movement of massive bodies, created a galaxy of green and blue light on the surface. It was bright enough to read by. And in the center of the light, the whales were working. They were diving in teams. A pod of sperm whales, the deep divers, the titans of the abyss, would surface, breathe, and dive straight down. Minutes later, a pod of orcas would dive. Then pilot whales. They were relaying. They were executing a shift change. What are they doing down there? Vance asked, gripping the railing. The bottom is 2 miles deep. Orcas can't go that deep. They aren't going to the bottom, Elena said, lowering her deep-sea hydrophone over the side. They're going to the thermal layer. Listen. The sound that came up through the speakers was a rhythmic, mechanical thumping. Clang, clang, clang. It sounded like a pile driver. They're striking the thermal layer, Elena said, her eyes widening as the physics clicked into place. They're creating a resonance chamber. They're using their bodies to send a percussive shockwave down to the fault line. Why? Resonance, Elena said. If you hit a trapped tectonic plate at the right resonant frequency, you can release the tension incrementally. You can trigger a series of microquakes instead of one massive megaquake. They're defusing the bomb, James. They're geoengineering the planet to save us. My God, Vance whispered. They're the maintenance crew, but they need time, Elena said. It's a slow process. They have to keep the rhythm perfect. If the Navy hits this area with chaotic active sonar now, it will disrupt the rhythm. The plate will slip all at once. Radar contact, Elias shouted from the wheelhouse. Fast mover, bearing south. It's a surface warship, and I've got a submerged contact below it. Big one. It was the Nevada and its escort destroyer, the USS Gridley. They were early. They're entering the firing solution, Vance said, checking his watch. They'll start pinging in 5 minutes. We have to stop them. We have to warn them, Elena said. Get on the radio. Vance grabbed the mic. USS Nevada, this is the civilian vessel North Star. You are entering a biological preservation zone. You are in danger of triggering a catastrophic seismic event. Abort your active sonar run. I repeat, abort. The radio crackled with static, then a cold voice cut through. Vessel North Star, this is the USS Gridley. You are in a restricted military operating area. Heave to and prepare to be boarded. Maintain radio silence, or you will be engaged. They aren't listening, Vance said, slamming his hand on the console. They never listen, Elena said. She looked at the water. The whales had stopped the diving. They were surfacing. The bioluminescence faded as they broke the surface, hundreds of black shapes rising in the gloom. They knew the Navy was here. And then they changed tactics. The Orcas moved toward the North Star. They didn't circle it this time. They lined up behind it, placing the small wooden boat between themselves and the approaching warship. They were using the boat as a shield? No, they were using it as an amplifier. Elena watched the spectrogram. The whales were directing their vocalizations at the boat's hull. The steel-reinforced hull of the crabber began to vibrate. What are they doing? Elias yelled, fighting the wheel as the boat shuddered violently. She's shaking apart. They're using us as a speaker, Elena realized. They're coupling their acoustic energy with the hull to create a louder signal. They're trying to jam the sub. They're trying to blind it before it can fire. The North Star shook violently. The sound was deafening, a scream of metal and biology fused together, a sonic weapon forged in the moment of desperation. On the USS Nevada, 500 feet below the surface, the sonar room was chaos. The captain ripped off his headset as a screeching feedback loop tore through the system. We're blind. The sonar officer yelled, clutching his ears. Massive acoustic interference. It's coming from the surface contact. It's overloading the sensors. Fire a warning shot across their bow, the captain ordered. Get them out of there. Clear the channel for the sonar pulse. The destroyer Gridley fired. A 5-inch shell screamed over the North Star, the sound tearing the air, and splashed down 200 yards ahead. A massive pillar of water rose up, rocking the small crab boat. "They're shooting at us." Elias roared. "I didn't sign up for war. I catch crabs, not missiles." "Hold your course," Vance shouted, grabbing Elias's shoulder. "If we move, the whales lose their amplifier. We are the only thing protecting the fault line." Elena looked at the water. The whales were taking a beating. The pressure waves from the shell impact were hammering them. She saw blood in the water. But they held the line. They kept screaming into the hull, sacrificing their bodies to maintain the jam. And then the ocean answered. The deep rhythmic clanging from the bottom stopped. It was replaced by a groan, a sound so low it made Elena's teeth ache, a sound that vibrated the fluid in her ear. "The plate," she whispered. "It's moving." The water around the North Star began to bubble. The sea floor was venting. "Is it the big one?" Vance asked, bracing himself against the bulkhead. "Did we fail?" Elena watched the seismic readout on her laptop. The graph spiked magnitude 3, then 4, then 4.5. The shaking was violent, but then it dropped. The energy dissipated. The spike flattened out. "No," she breathed, tears streaming down her face. It worked. They released the pressure. They triggered a controlled slip. They vented the energy. A series of small, rolling waves passed under the boat. No tsunami, no devastation. Just the earth settling into a more comfortable position, like a sleeper adjusting a pillow. The whales went silent. The vibration in the hull stopped. The Navy ships, seeing the seismic readings and the sudden cessation of the interference, paused. They were confused. Their mission was to prevent a disaster, or cause one. They weren't sure anymore. But the disaster hadn't happened. The fault line was stable. "They did it," Elena said, collapsing onto the deck, her adrenaline crashing. "They saved the coast." But the victory was short-lived. Because as the whales dispersed, exhausted and battered, a new signal appeared on the hydrophone. It wasn't from the whales, and it wasn't from the Navy. It was from the sky. The clouds above them parted, not from wind, but from displacement. The black object, the probe, the manager, had returned. But this time, it wasn't alone. 3 more objects descended from the clouds, hovering silently over the flotilla of whales. They projected a beam of light down into the water. This wasn't a scanning beam. It was a tractor beam. Elena watched in horror as a young orca, the calf of the matriarch who had led the charge, was lifted out of the water. It floated up into the light, suspended in a gravity-defying field, thrashing in the air, its high-pitched screams audible even over the wind. The mother orca leaped out of the water, snapping her jaws, screaming, trying to grab her child. She breached again and again, reaching for the sky, but the calf continued to rise, vanishing into the belly of the black craft. "They're taking samples," Vance said, his face pale, watching the abduction. "They're harvesting." The objects ascended and vanished into the upper atmosphere. The mother orca fell back into the water with a splash that sounded like heartbreak. The Navy ships turned and fled. They had seen enough. They wanted no part of an interstellar incident. They retreated to the safety of their base, leaving the civilians alone in the dark. The North Star drifted in the silence. The whales were grieving. The sound of their calls was no longer defiant. It was a keen, a weeping song that echoed across the Pacific. Elena stood up. She looked at Vance. "We stopped the earthquake," she said, her voice hollow. "But we just started a war." "With who?" Vance asked. "The aliens?" "No," Elena said, looking at the dark water where the mother orca was circling, alone. "With the whales. They trusted the ocean. They trusted the managers. And the managers just stole their child because we interfered. We brought the Navy. We brought the violence." She went to the computer. The signal from the whales had changed again. The name they had given the ocean, the 3-pulse code, was gone. It was replaced by a new sequence. Sharp, jagged, violent. What are they saying now? Elias asked quietly, removing his hat. Helena translated the code. It was a single word, repeated over and over in the darkness. Betrayal. The weeks following the harvest were a time of eerie, unnatural quiet. The whales disappeared. The resident pods that usually patrolled the San Juan Islands vanished into the deep trenches off the continental shelf. The transient hunters stopped visiting the seal rookeries. The ocean, usually teeming with the clicks, whistles, and echolocation of cetacean life, went mute. It was a silence that felt like a held breath, a strategic withdrawal before a counteroffensive. The Navy kept their ships in port, terrified of triggering another incident. The scientists kept their hydrophones running, listening to the static of a dead sea. Elena Carras didn't go back to civilization. She stayed on the North Star, which was now docked in a hidden, misty inlet on the remote coast of British Columbia. Elias, the crabber, had become their de facto captain and supply runner, bringing fuel and canned food from the nearest outpost. Vance was their security, cleaning his service pistol and watching the tree line. And Elena was the listener. She kept the hydrophones running 24 hours a day, sleeping in shifts, waiting for the signal to return. She knew they hadn't left. She knew they were planning. The signal came on a Tuesday at dawn. But it didn't come from the water. It came from the land. Elena was drinking coffee on the damp deck, watching the fog roll off the pines, when her laptop, connected via satellite to a global network of seismic sensors, pinged. It was a sharp digital alert, an anomaly, then another, then a cascade of red dots appearing on the map. "Vance!" she yelled, spilling her coffee. "Wake up!" Vance stumbled onto the deck, rubbing sleep from his eyes, his hand instinctively going to his holster. "What is it? Did they find us?" "No," Elena said, her eyes wide, reflecting the screen. "Look at the data. Seismic tremors, not in the ocean. In the rivers." "Rivers don't have tremors," Vance said, leaning in. "That's impossible. They do now. The Columbia, the Fraser, the Sacramento. Massive low-frequency vibrations are being reported near major hydroelectric dams, the Grand Coulee, the Bonneville." Elena pulled up a live security feed from a dam on the Columbia River, hacking into the public utility grid with codes she had scraped from the dark web. The video was grainy, black and white. It showed the massive concrete wall of the dam, the water behind it churning violently. And there, in the freshwater reservoir, miles from the ocean, were dorsal fins. "They went upstream," Elena whispered, a chill running through her that had nothing to do with the morning air. "They infiltrated the freshwater systems. Orcas don't go that far inland," Vance said, shaking his head. "The fresh water messes with their skin. It creates drag. It causes sloughing. It's dangerous for them." "They don't care," Elena said. "They aren't feeding. They're attacking infrastructure." On the screen, the whales were moving in a line. They were ramming the intake grates of the dam's turbines. They were using their bodies as battering rams. Thump, thump, thump. The vibration was resonant, perfectly timed to the natural frequency of the concrete structure. They were finding the flaw in the engineering. "They're trying to break the dams," Vance realized. "Why? To flood the cities? To release the salmon?" Elias said from the wheelhouse, his voice grave. "Or maybe just to show us that our walls don't mean anything. Maybe they're cutting the power." He was right. Lights flickered in Portland. The grid destabilized in Seattle. But it wasn't just dams. Reports started flooding in from coastal cities. Ferries were being capsized in Puget Sound, not by waves, but by coordinated rammings. Cargo ships were being run aground in Vancouver, their rudders disabled by surgical strikes. The undersea fiber-optic cables that connected North America to Asia, the backbone of the internet, the nervous system of the human world, were being severed, bitten through by jaws capable of crushing bone. The war had begun. And it wasn't a war of violence against flesh. It was a war of logistics. The whales were dismantling the human economy. They were turning off the lights. They were isolating the continent. They're cutting us off, Elena said, watching the news feeds vanish one by one as the internet degraded. They're putting us in a cage. We have to stop them, Vance said, pacing the deck. The Navy is going to start slaughtering them. They won't tolerate attacks on the power grid. They'll drop depth charges in the rivers. They'll poison the water. We can't stop them, Elena said. Not unless we give them back what was taken. The calf? Vance asked. How? The aliens took it. The managers. We don't have a spaceship, Elena. We don't have a phone line to the stars. No, Elena said, her eyes burning with a sudden desperate idea. She looked at the hard drives stacked on her desk. The terabytes of data. The recordings of the council. The proof of whale sapience. The history of the ocean. But we have the beacon. She ran to her equipment stack, pulling cables, checking connections. The whales called the probe using a specific frequency sequence. A summoning song. If we can replicate that song, if we can broadcast it loud enough, we might be able to call the probe back. And then what? Vance asked. Ask them nicely to return the baby? No, Elena said. We negotiate. We offer a trade. A trade? Vance looked at her like she was insane. What do we have that an advanced interstellar civilization wants? We're ants to them. Data, Elena said. The probe was scanning. It was harvesting information, biological samples. It wants to know about this planet, about the biosphere. We have the complete archive. We have the Rosetta Stone of Earth's biology. We give them the data, they give us the calf. It saves them the trouble of harvesting more whales. It's efficient. And if there is one thing that probes seem to be, it was efficient. It was a long shot, a suicide mission. But it was the only card they had left to play. We need a transmitter, Alana said. Something bigger than this boat. Something that can punch a hole in the sky. The HARP array in Alaska, Vance said immediately. High-frequency active auroral research program. It's a massive transmitter field. It can bounce signals off the ionosphere. It can reach anywhere. It can reach orbit. Can you get us access? I still have my clearance codes, Vance said, checking his watch. If they haven't revoked them yet. But we have to get there. Physically. We can't hack it remotely. They didn't have time to sail to Alaska. The North Star was too slow. They needed speed. They docked the boat in Prince Rupert, abandoning it. They bought an old beat-up truck with cash Elias had stashed in a coffee can. They drove. They raced north, crossing the border into the Yukon, driving through blinding blizzards and treacherous mountain passes, fueled by caffeine, adrenaline, and the terrifying knowledge that the Navy was mobilizing destroyers to the Columbia River. They reached the HAARP facility 3 days later. It was a forest of antennas rising out of the snow, a cathedral of technology in the middle of a frozen wasteland. The sky above was a swirling curtain of green aurora borealis, the ionosphere charged and waiting. The gates were guarded, but Vance bluffed his way past the sentry, flashing his badge and claiming a classified inspection from the Pentagon. The confusion of the ongoing global blackouts worked in their favor. The guards were nervous, cut off from command, and willing to believe a commander with an attitude. They broke into the main control room. It was a cold, sterile bunker filled with banks of computers and humming transceivers. It was empty, automated for the night shift. Elena plugged her laptop into the main console. Her hands were shaking so badly she could barely type. I'm uploading the sequence, she said. The beacon call, and the data packet. Everything we have. Every song, every seismic reading, every proof of life. How long? Vance asked, watching the security monitors. 10 minutes. We don't have 10 minutes, Vance said. Security is coming. They just checked my credentials. They know I'm AWOL. On the screens, armed guards were running toward the building, their breath steaming in the cold air. The facility's alarm began to blare, a harsh, rhythmic klaxon. "Hold them off," Elena said, hitting the execute command. "James, buy me time." Vance nodded. He locked the heavy steel door and barricaded it with a chair. He drew his service pistol, checking the chamber. "I won't shoot to kill," he said. "But they aren't getting in." The upload bar crawled. 20%. 40%. Outside, the guards began to pound on the door. "Open up. Federal agents. Open the door, or we will breach." "Just a calibration test." Vance yelled back, his voice steady. "Stand down. We have a critical system error. Breach the door." A voice ordered. The door shuddered as a battering ram hit it. The hinges screamed. Elena hit broadcast. Transmitting. The facility hummed. The floor vibrated. Outside, the antennas crackled with energy, glowing with a blue corona discharge. A beam of invisible power, gigawatts of radio frequency energy, shot up into the ionosphere, carrying the song of the whales and the knowledge of humanity into the void. It was a shout into the dark. The door burst open. Guards swarmed in, tackling Vance, throwing him to the floor. Elena was pulled away from the console, handcuffs snapping onto her wrists, her face pressed against the cold linoleum. "Shut it down," the lead guard shouted. "Kill the transmission. They're frying the grid." But it was too late. The signal was out. They were dragged into holding cells in the basement of the facility. They sat in silence for hours, waiting for the interrogation, waiting for prison, waiting for the world to end. Then the ground shook. It wasn't an earthquake. It wasn't a bomb. It was a landing. The lights in the facility flickered and died. The emergency red lights bathed the corridor in blood-colored gloom. The guards started screaming. "It's outside! It's right outside! Look at the size of it!" Elena looked out the small, barred window of her cell. Hovering over the antenna array was the black object. It was massive, blocking out the stars, a void in the sky. It descended silently, defying gravity. A beam of blue light shot down, not at the antennas, but at the snowfield beyond the fence. In the beam of light, a small black shape descended. It twisted in the air, disoriented, terrified. The calf. It landed in the deep snow, flailing. It was alive. The snow cushioned its fall. The object hovered for a moment longer. Then, a new sound echoed through the facility, vibrating the fillings in Elena's teeth. Not a siren, not a voice. A sequence of 3 pulses. Low, high, low. The name of the ocean. Then the object vanished, shooting up into space with a speed that blurred the vision, leaving a sonic boom that shattered the windows of the control tower. The silence returned, but it was broken by a frantic call on the guards' radios. "This is Sector 4. We have a marine mammal on the perimeter, requesting immediate transport. It's a whale in the snow. We need a flatbed. Get water." Elena slumped against the wall, laughing through her tears. "They took the deal," she whispered. "They took the data." The calf was transported to the coast by a bewildered military convoy, wrapped in wet blankets, sprayed with water every minute. It was released into the Gulf of Alaska, sliding into the freezing water. The effect was instantaneous. The attacks on the dam stopped. The ferries began to run again. The cables were left alone. The whales retreated from the rivers, swimming back to the deep. The lights came back on in Seattle. The internet reconnected. The war was over. The hostage had been returned. Elena and Vance were eventually released. The government couldn't prosecute them without admitting that aliens had kidnapped a whale, and that 2 civilians had negotiated its release using a classified military array. The official story was a classified communication experiment that had gone awry. They were silenced with NDAs and threats, but they were free. But the world had changed. The whales didn't go back to being animals. They had shown their hand. They had shown they could organize, strategize, and dismantle human civilization if pushed too far. And they had shown they had friends in high places. The managers were watching. Elena retired to her cabin. She still watched the ocean, but she didn't study it anymore. She simply respected it. She threw away her hydrophones. She didn't want to listen to conversations she wasn't invited to. One evening, years later, she was sitting on her porch. The sun was setting, painting the water in gold and violet. The ocean was calm, the terrible energy of that day long gone. A pod of orcas swam by. They were close to shore, moving slowly. In the center of the pod was a young male, strong and healthy. He had a strange mark on his dorsal fin, a perfect geometric circle of white scar tissue. The mark of the probe. The calf, grown up. The whale stopped. He rolled on his side. He spy-hopped, lifting his head high out of the water, looking directly at Elena. He held her gaze for a long minute. He didn't say thank you. He didn't offer gratitude. There is no gratitude in nature, only balance. He simply acknowledged her existence and the truce that existed between them. Then he sank back into the black water and swam west, toward the horizon where the sky meets the sea, toward the secrets that were no longer ours to keep. This story is a reminder that we are not the landlords of this planet. We are the tenants, and we are behind on the rent. The ocean is watching. The ice is listening. And somewhere in the deep, the true owners are waiting to see if we are worth saving, or if it is time to start the eviction. If this story kept you on the edge of your seat, if it made you look at the blue map on your wall a little differently, hit that subscribe button, leave a like, and tell us in the comments, what would you do if the ocean started talking back? Stay safe, stay curious, and remember, don't wake the deep.